On the happiest day of my life, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and 50 tables of cheering guests, my own sister handed me a silver gift box. It was supposed to be a heartwarming moment. But before my fingers could even brush the silk ribbon, my husband, a Navy SEAL commander, gripped my wrist with bone-crushing force. "Do not touch that," he commanded, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. When I asked what was wrong, he locked eyes with my sister and said she just brought a threat into our home. In 3 seconds flat, his entire unit of military groomsmen was on their feet, locking down the grand ballroom. My sister's arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your true worth. The air in the grand ballroom of the Atlanta Plaza Hotel was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive champagne. I had paid for every single detail of this wedding myself. I dropped over $100,000 in cash, without breaking a sweat, ensuring that my marriage to Marcus would be celebrated in absolute elegance. But if you asked my parents, Deacon and Yolanda, they were the ones graciously funding this charity event for their struggling youngest daughter. I sat at the head table in my custom silk gown, Marcus looking incredibly handsome beside me in his immaculate dress uniform. His hand rested warmly over mine, acting as a steady anchor against the toxic family dynamics I had endured my entire life. The clinking of a silver spoon against crystal cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. My mother Yolanda stood up from her seat. She was wearing an emerald gown that was deliberately flashy, determined to draw every eye in the room away from the bride. She took the microphone, her lips stretched into a practiced camera-ready smile. The room quieted down, expecting a mother's loving tribute. Instead, they got a masterclass in public humiliation. "We are so thrilled to be here today," my mother began, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You know, when my oldest daughter Kendra married Bradley last year, I thought I had experienced the absolute pinnacle of a mother's joy. Kendra and Bradley are building a true legacy, a million-dollar class marriage. Bradley is dominating the financial world as a hedge fund manager, and they are living the absolute dream in their beautiful new mansion in Buckhead." I kept my face perfectly still, a survival skill I had mastered over 3 decades of being the family scapegoat. I watched as Bradley, my white brother-in-law, leaned back in his chair. He swirled his expensive bourbon and shot a condescending smirk across the room at Marcus. He carried himself with a bloated arrogance, treating our African-American family like we should be grateful for his presence. My aunts and uncles murmured in agreement with my mother, completely buying into the illusion of wealth she was selling. "And then there is our Zaria," my mother sighed dramatically into the microphone. She shook her head as if I were a tragic charity case. "Zariah has always marched to the beat of her own drum. While Kendra was out networking and building a real future, Zariah was locked in her room playing with computer parts and tangled wires. We honestly worried she would end up fixing broken laptops at a local repair shop for the rest of her life." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the tables closest to the front. I felt the familiar heat of anger rise in my chest, but I maintained my polite smile. My mother was deliberately painting me as a failure in front of 300 guests. She had no idea that my little computer hobby was actually a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity firm called Aegis Cyber Defense, holding classified contracts with the Pentagon. I let my family believe I was broke because it kept their greedy hands out of my bank accounts. But somehow my mother continued, her tone dripping with mock relief. "Our little computer repair girl got incredibly lucky. She found Marcus. Sure, a military salary is never going to buy them a luxury estate or a private jet. They will not be taking glamorous trips to Dubai like Kendra and Bradley do. But at least our Zariah finally has a strong man to pay her rent and keep her grounded." Before the cringe-inducing applause could even start, my father, Deacon, grabbed the microphone. He chuckled, a deep booming sound that usually meant someone was about to be insulted. "Marcus, son, you better treat her right," my father said loudly. She is used to scraping by and living paycheck to paycheck with her little freelance gigs. You have a huge job ahead of you taking care of her financially. Do not let her drain your bank account too fast. More laughter erupted from my family's side of the room. I looked at Marcus. He did not laugh. He did not even offer a polite smile. He simply stared at my father with a calm, predatory stillness that instantly made the air around our table drop 10 degrees. Marcus was a man who survived elite combat zones and led a specialized cyber-terrorism unit. He was not intimidated by a man in a rented tuxedo trying to assert dominance. His thumb gently stroked the back of my hand, a silent promise that he was perfectly in control. But the humiliation was not over. Bradley whispered something into Kendra's ear, and she let out a loud, obnoxious laugh that drowned out the background music. Kendra stood up, smoothing down her designer dress, and confidently strode toward the center of the stage. She snatched the microphone from our father. Her eyes locked onto mine, gleaming with pure malice. Zaria Marcus Kendra purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. As the older sister who has already established a highly successful upper-class life, I know exactly how hard it is when you are just starting out at the bottom. Bradley and I know you guys are probably stressing right now about how to pay for your basic utilities now that all these wedding bills are due. We know military life is tough and freelance tech support does not exactly put food on the table. Kendra signaled to one of the catering staff. A waiter hurried forward carrying a large, heavy box wrapped in shimmering silver paper topped with a massive white silk ribbon. He placed it carefully on the table directly in front of Marcus and me. The box looked pristine, expensive, and completely out of place. Kendra leaned into the microphone one last time, her smirk widening into a look of absolute triumph. So Bradley and I decided to get you something special. Consider this a family heirloom to help my little sister finally escape poverty and get a taste of the real world. Go ahead, Zaria. Open it. My fingers barely grazed the shimmering silver paper when Marcus's hand clamped down on my wrist. His grip wasn't painful, but it was absolute. It was the kind of immovable force you don't argue with. I looked at him completely confused. The relaxed, smiling groom from seconds ago was gone. His jaw was clenched, his posture rigid, and his eyes had gone completely flat. He wasn't looking at the box. He was staring directly at Kendra. "Don't touch it," he said, his voice dropping to a lethal, icy whisper that barely carried over the microphone feedback. I froze. "Marcus, what is wrong?" I asked. He didn't look at me. His gaze remained locked on my sister, sharp and calculating. "You brought a threat into my home." The silence that followed was suffocating. The jazz music had stopped completely. The quiet murmur of 300 guests ceased. The air in the grand ballroom felt like it had been sucked out. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Kendra's smug smile faltered, replaced by a twitch of genuine confusion, and then a flash of defensive anger. "Excuse me," Kendra sputtered, her voice shrill and indignant. "Are you insane? It is a wedding gift for my sister. A very expensive wedding gift, I might add. You are being ridiculous." My father Deacon slammed his hand down on the table, the crystal glasses rattling violently. "Now listen here, Marcus. I know you military boys get a little jumpy, but this is a high-class event. You will not disrespect my daughter like this. She is doing Zaria a huge favor. You need to apologize to Kendra right now." Marcus completely ignored him. He didn't even acknowledge my father's outburst. He raised his left hand and made two short, sharp gestures with his fingers. It happened so fast it was almost a blur. In less than 3 seconds, the 6 men sitting at the VIP table nearest to us were on their feet. They didn't stumble or hesitate. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. These were Marcus's groomsmen, all active-duty Navy SEALs. 2 of them immediately moved to block the main double doors of the ballroom. 2 others flanked the stage, scanning the crowd with cold, assessing eyes. The remaining 2 stepped up to our table, positioning themselves solidly between Marcus and the rest of my family. The guests gasped, a collective wave of shock rolling through the room. Several people stood up, chairs scraping loudly against the polished floor. "Sit down," one of the SEALs commanded, his voice carrying the effortless authority of someone used to giving orders in war zones. The room instantly complied. People sank back into their chairs, eyes wide with fear and confusion. My mother Yolanda gripped the edge of her seat, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked. "You are ruining the wedding. You are embarrassing us in front of all these important people." Marcus finally turned his attention to my parents. His voice was calm, unnervingly steady. "I am securing the perimeter," he stated simply. Bradley, my hedge fund manager brother-in-law, puffed out his chest and took a step forward, trying to assert some kind of corporate dominance. "Look, pal, I don't know what kind of PTSD episode you are having, but you need to back off. That box is perfectly safe. It is a state-of-the-art digital photo frame loaded with family memories. Kendra and I spent a lot of money on it. Tell your goons to stand down before I call hotel security." Marcus's eyes shifted to Bradley. A slow, chilling smile played on his lips. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator recognizing prey. "A digital photo frame," Marcus repeated softly. "How thoughtful." He nodded to the SEAL standing nearest to him, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jackson, who served as the team's communications specialist. "Check it." Jackson didn't hesitate. He pulled a matte black tactical knife from a concealed sheath under his tuxedo jacket. The collective gasp from my family was audible. My mother actually covered her mouth. Jackson drove the blade straight into the shimmering silver paper, slicing through the expensive wrapping and the thick cardboard lid in one fluid, brutal motion. He ripped the top off the box and tossed it aside. Inside sat a sleek, modern digital photo frame exactly as Bradley had described. It looked completely normal. It looked like a generic, overly expensive gift. Kendra crossed her arms, a triumphant sneer returning to her face. "See, I told you, you paranoid freak," she spat. "It is just a photo frame. You are ruining everything, Zariah. Control your husband." But Jackson wasn't looking at the screen. He was running his fingers along the thick, weighted base of the frame. He pressed the tip of his knife into a tiny, almost invisible seam along the bottom edge and pried it open. The plastic backing snapped off with a sharp crack. Jackson held the frame up, exposing the internal wiring to Marcus. It wasn't just a screen and a basic processor. Tucked neatly next to the battery pack spliced directly into the frame's power supply and Wi-Fi antenna was a small, sophisticated piece of hardware. It had a blinking green light and a series of complex microchips that looked completely alien to a standard consumer device. Jackson looked at Marcus and gave a single tight nod. "Backdoor interceptor, military grade. It is wired to piggyback off any local network and transmit data continuously." The color drained completely from Kendra's face. She stumbled back a step, bumping into Bradley. Bradley's arrogant posture instantly collapsed. His eyes darted toward the ballroom doors, measuring the distance, calculating an escape route. The hedge fund manager suddenly looked very, very small. Marcus stood up slowly. He picked up the shattered frame, examining the interceptor chip closely. He looked down at Bradley, the silence stretching out until it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. "A digital photo frame," Marcus said again, his voice echoing coldly in the vast space. "A digital photo frame equipped with a hardware keylogger and a network infiltration module, designed to bypass encrypted firewalls and siphon classified data." My father tried to speak, his voice trembling. I don't understand. What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, locking eyes with Bradley, "that your son-in-law just tried to plant a surveillance device in the home of a Navy SEAL commander who holds top-secret security clearance. It means he just committed a federal crime." Bradley raised his hands defensively, his voice high and panicked. "I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I bought it off some guy online. It was supposed to be a joke, a prank. It's just a prank." Marcus didn't blink. He casually dropped the heavily wired photo frame into a half-full crystal pitcher of ice water on the table. The device sparked violently, letting out a sharp hiss before short-circuiting and dying completely. "The joke is over," Marcus said. He turned his back on Bradley and faced my parents. His posture was rigid, his authority absolute. I want you all out of here. Right now. You are no longer welcome at this wedding, and you are no longer welcome in our lives. My mother started to cry, real tears this time, her face contorting with panic. Zariah, please. You can't let him do this. We are your family. I looked at her, then at Kendra, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I looked at Bradley, who was sweating profusely, his eyes darting nervously around the room. For 30 years, I had taken their insults. I had swallowed their disrespect. I had let them treat me like garbage to keep the peace. But planting a listening device to steal classified information, that wasn't just toxic family drama. That was treason. Marcus is right, I said, my voice shockingly calm. Get out. My father's face contorted with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. You are making a huge mistake, Zariah. You are choosing this paranoid thug over your own flesh and blood. You are nothing but a disappointment. You always have been. Bradley leaned in close as he was being ushered away by two of the SEALs. His face was pale, but his eyes were filled with desperate malice. You think you're so smart, he hissed at me. I will make that pathetic little IT company of yours go bankrupt before the sun comes up. I will ruin you. I watched them being escorted out of the ballroom, their angry protests echoing down the hallway. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them out of my life. I turned to Marcus, my heart pounding against my ribs. I knew exactly what Bradley was capable of, and I knew he wasn't making an empty threat. The war hadn't ended with them leaving the reception. It had only just begun. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. My family was gone. The toxic cloud they always brought with them had been forcibly removed from my presence. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders. Marcus sat back down in the chair beside me. He reached over, picked up his glass of water, and took a casual sip, entirely unbothered by the chaos that had just unfolded. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I reached for my glass of expensive champagne. I brought it to my lips and took a long, satisfying drink. Bradley thought he was going to bankrupt a small-time computer repair shop. He thought he was playing a game of intimidation with a helpless woman who lived in the shadow of her successful older sister. He had absolutely no idea that he had just declared war on a woman who controlled the digital infrastructure of the most powerful organizations on the planet. He had promised to destroy my company by morning. I was going to enjoy watching him try. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, but the warmth did absolutely nothing to cut through the ice-cold reality waiting on my phone screen. I had not slept. Marcus was already up running drills in the private gym downstairs, giving me the space I needed to deal with the fallout. I had fully expected a nasty text from Kendra or maybe a passive-aggressive email from my mother. What I got was an absolute barrage of digital vitriol that practically vibrated with panic and malice. My phone chimed relentlessly, the notification sound morphing into a harsh grating alarm. I picked it up, my eyes scanning the flood of messages. My mother, Yolanda, had sent 14 texts in the span of 30 minutes. The first few were exactly what I anticipated. You are a disgrace to this family, Zariah. You humiliated your sister on her own terms. How could you let your husband act like a thug? By the 10th message, the tone shifted from scolding to outright threatening. Bradley says he is going to make sure your little computer repair shop goes bankrupt before noon. You better beg him for forgiveness. You are dead to us. I swiped the notifications away, my expression perfectly neutral. My mother's threats were pathetic, built entirely on the illusion of Bradley's power. But Bradley was not just running his mouth. My laptop, sitting open on the granite kitchen island, began to ping with system alerts. A rapid cascading series of red warning windows popped up across the screen. I walked over, wrapping my hands around a steaming mug of black coffee. I leaned in, reading the diagnostic data streaming across the terminal window. A distributed denial of service attack, and a surprisingly aggressive one. Bradley had not wasted any time. He had clearly tapped into his shady network of dark web contacts, hiring a botnet to flood the servers of Z-Tech with overwhelming traffic. It was a brute force method, crude but effective against a small-time business. The goal was obvious: crush my servers, destroy my client data, and force me to my knees begging for mercy so my family could reassert their dominance. They actually thought Z-Tech was all I had. They thought knocking out a fake storefront website would break me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, bitter taste grounded me. A slow, chilling laugh escaped my lips, echoing in the quiet penthouse. It was the laugh of a woman who had spent a decade playing chess while her family was busy playing checkers. Bradley was attacking a decoy. He was throwing rocks at a cardboard cutout of a fortress, completely unaware of the actual, heavily fortified citadel standing right behind it. I set the mug down with a solid clink against the granite. The slight, almost imperceptible shake in my hands wasn't from fear or anxiety. It was the pure adrenaline-fueled anticipation of a predator preparing to strike. I cracked my knuckles, the sound sharp in the quiet room. I reached out and typed a 13-character alphanumeric sequence into the command line. It wasn't a password to fix the tiny Z-Tech servers. It was an override protocol. The screen flickered. The red warning windows vanished instantly, replaced by a deep, absolute black. For 2 seconds, the screen remained blank. Then, slowly materializing from the darkness, a highly intricate logo appeared, a matte black tactical shield bisected by a silver lightning bolt. Beneath it, the words rendered in crisp, military-grade font: Aegis Cyber Defense. This was not a struggling repair shop. This was a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity conglomerate. Aegis handled threat mitigation for the Department of Defense, secured financial networks for global banks, and developed counterinsurgency software for intelligence agencies. I was not just the CEO, I was the architect. I had built the walls they relied on to keep the world turning. And Bradley, the arrogant hedge fund manager who thought he was untouchable, had just decided to knock on my front door with a toy hammer. I initiated a secure connection to my core operations team, pulling up a multi-feed interface. The faces of my 3 lead analysts popped onto the screen, all looking sharp, alert, and ready for action. "Boss, we are seeing the DDoS spikes on the Z-Tech decoy servers, David," my lead network architect reported. "The attackers are using a standard botnet routing through a proxy farm in Eastern Europe. It is loud, sloppy, and generating a massive footprint. Contain the overflow and let them think they are making progress." I instructed, my voice flat and commanding. I do not want them to pull back. I want them fully committed. I want them to think they have me on the ropes. Bradley thinks he is destroying my livelihood. Let him exhaust his resources. I opened a separate terminal, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced lethal precision. Bradley had made a fatal error. By launching a cyber attack, he had essentially handed me the keys to his own kingdom. To direct the botnet, the attackers had to leave a digital trail, a breadcrumb connecting their proxy servers back to the source of payment and command. "David," I said, not taking my eyes off the rapidly scrolling data. "Isolate the command and control nodes. I don't just want to stop the attack. I want to trace the origin point. We are not just defending today. We are going on the offensive." "Understood," David replied, the sound of his rapid typing syncing with my own. I watched as Aegis's proprietary algorithms went to work. The software sliced through the attackers' sloppy proxy layers like a scalpel through silk. They had tried to hide their tracks, but their methods were amateurish compared to the military-grade tech I had designed. It took exactly 4 minutes for the system to break through the final proxy wall. The screen populated with a direct IP address. It wasn't an anonymous server farm in Russia. The IP trace led straight back to a private encrypted network located in a high-rise building in Buckhead, Atlanta. "Gotcha," I whispered. The IP address belonged to the primary servers of Apex Capital Management, Bradley's hedge fund. He had been arrogant enough, or perhaps stupid enough, to coordinate the attack using resources tied directly to his own corporate network. My phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. "Bradley says your website is down. He says this is just the beginning. Apologize to him now, Zariah, before you lose everything." I stared at the message, a cold, ruthless resolve hardening in my chest. My mother was practically salivating at the idea of my ruin. She wanted me broken, humiliated, and begging for scraps from the very man who had tried to plant a surveillance device in my home. She valued her proximity to Bradley's perceived wealth over the safety and dignity of her own flesh and blood. I did not reply to her text. Instead, I turned my attention back to the terminal. Bradley wanted to play a digital war game. He wanted to destroy my assets. I was going to show him what real destruction looked like. I highlighted the IP address for Apex Capital Management. David, I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Prepare a targeted counterstrike. I want a full diagnostic scan of Apex Capital's internal network architecture. Do not trigger any alarms. Map their entire system. Find every backdoor, every unsecured port, every hidden file directory. We are in, boss. David confirmed seconds later. Their firewalls are standard commercial grade. It is like walking through an unlocked door. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the directory structures of Bradley's supposedly elite hedge fund. The deeper I went, the more the illusion began to crack. This wasn't the impenetrable fortress of a financial titan. This was a house of cards. And I was about to find out exactly what Bradley was trying so desperately to hide. Access the main financial ledgers, I commanded. I want to see the real numbers, not the public filings. I want to see the raw data, the accounts they think are secure. I want to know exactly what kind of business my brilliant brother-in-law is actually running. The screen flickered as the encrypted files began to decrypt, revealing the rotting core of Bradley's empire. But before I could sift through the financial graveyard of his hedge fund, my secondary monitor flared a bright, urgent yellow. The mercenary hackers Bradley had hired were getting restless. Seeing their initial distributed denial of service attack effortlessly absorbed by my decoy servers, they decided to escalate. They launched a brute force intrusion, attempting to inject a malicious ransomware payload directly into what they assumed was my primary database. It was genuinely insulting. They were deploying off-the-shelf exploit kits, the exact kind of amateur recycled malware a bored teenager might buy on a dark web forum for $50. Bradley had hired bottom-feeder criminals who thought they were hacking a local laptop repair shop. They were essentially bringing a dull plastic fruit knife to a tank battle. They had absolutely no idea that Aegis Cyber Defense actively wrote the countermeasure protocols that the Pentagon used to repel sophisticated state-sponsored cyber terrorism. They had just confidently marched onto an active digital minefield. I took a slow, steadying breath. I did not just want to block them. Blocking them was defensive. It was passive. I wanted to send a message so loud, so violently clear, that these hackers would be permanently retired from the keyboard. I cracked my neck, shaking off the lingering tension from the ballroom lockdown. David, I said, my voice cutting through the secure comms channel. Drop the outer decoy firewalls. All of them. David hesitated for a fraction of a second. Boss, if we drop the outer shell, they will flood the containment sector. That is exactly what I want them to do, I replied. My eyes locked on the inbound traffic metrics. Let them think they broke through the front gate. I want them fully committed. When they rush into the antechamber, slam the port shut and lock them inside. Copy that, dropping the firewall in 3, 2, 1. The outer defenses fell. On my screen, a massive wave of hostile data instantly surged into the fabricated network space, eager to corrupt and destroy. The hackers were probably cheering in whatever basement they were hiding in, thinking they had just conquered Z-Tech. Port locked, David announced, a grim satisfaction in his tone. They are trapped in the sandbox. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. I did not need a team to handle this next part. I typed exactly 3 lines of code. It was a proprietary sequence I had developed years ago, specifically designed for this exact scenario. The first line of code severed their ability to disconnect, anchoring their active IP addresses to my server so they could not retreat. The second line brutally stripped away their remaining proxy masks and virtual private network layers, exposing their true physical server locations down to the exact geographical coordinates. They were operating out of a damp warehouse in Eastern Europe. The third line was the kill shot. It was a malicious feedback loop. Instead of blocking their data stream, My code absorbed it, replicated it exponentially, and fired a massive concentrated pulse of raw data directly back down their own pipeline. I hit enter. The visualizer on my screen bloomed with brilliant white light as the data surge hit its target. From 5,000 miles away, I bypassed their network limiters and attacked their hardware directly. The sheer volume of the return traffic overwhelmed their systems instantly. I watched the connection metrics flatline one by one as their servers began to overheat. Without thermal regulation, their cooling fans would be screaming, their processors spiking past critical mass. Within seconds, I had physically fried their motherboards. Their entire operation was reduced to smoking plastic and melted silicon. The mercenary hackers were completely irreversibly annihilated. Threat neutralized, I said quietly, taking another sip of my coffee. With the digital gnats effectively swatted, I turned my full, undivided attention back to the primary monitor. The decryption bar for Apex Capital Management had reached 100%. The vault doors of Bradley's elite, highly respected hedge fund swung wide open, leaving him completely exposed. My parents treated Bradley like a financial deity. They worshipped his custom-tailored Italian suits, his sprawling Buckhead mansion, and his exclusive country club memberships. My mother constantly used his success as a bludgeon to beat me down firmly, believing his wealth elevated our entire family's social standing. He was the golden son-in-law, the man who could do no wrong, the man who was allowed to insult my husband simply because he managed millions of dollars. But as I began parsing through his master ledgers, the reality of his so-called empire laid itself bare. My eyes scanned the scrolling columns of numbers, cross-referencing account balances with actual market investments. A cold, cynical smile spread across my face. There were no brilliant investment strategies. There were no highly profitable exclusive portfolios outperforming the market. Apex Capital Management was a complete fraud. It was a glorified, intricately layered Ponzi scheme. The classic signs were all there, hidden behind encrypted folders and dummy corporate entities. Bradley was using the incoming capital from new, unsuspecting investors to pay fabricated returns to his older, wealthier clients. He was shifting money from column A to column B, generating fake quarterly reports to make it look like his clients were making a fortune. And right there, sitting in the middle of his prime client list, were my parents. Deacon and Yolanda had invested their entire retirement savings with Apex Capital. They had given Bradley every dime they had ever earned, trusting him to secure their future. Bradley had taken their money and immediately used it to pay off the dividends of a local politician he was trying to bribe. But a Ponzi scheme of this magnitude required a massive constant influx of cash to stay afloat, and the raw data showed that Bradley was bleeding out. He was hemorrhaging money at a catastrophic rate. Not only was he failing to bring in enough new investors to cover the old ones, but he was actively skimming massive amounts off the top to fund his own lavish lifestyle. The Buckhead mansion, the fleet of luxury cars, the private jets to Dubai, the absurdly expensive designer gifts he bought to buy my family's loyalty, it was all paid for with stolen money. He was bleeding his own company dry to maintain the illusion of success. No wonder he was so desperate. No wonder he had resorted to planting a surveillance bug in the home of a Navy SEAL commander. He wasn't just arrogant. He was drowning. He needed inside information, corporate secrets, government contracts, anything he could sell or leverage to keep his fraudulent hedge fund from collapsing in on itself. He saw Marcus's security clearance as a potential lifeline. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the damning evidence glowing on my monitors. Bradley had threatened to bankrupt me. He had promised to ruin my life and put me on the street. He had done this while standing on a financial trapdoor that was mere moments away from swinging open and hanging him by his own tailored silk tie. But I was not satisfied with just uncovering a Ponzi scheme. Fraud was common. It was boring. A man like Bradley, a man desperate enough to cross the United States military, was absolutely involved in something darker. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. I needed to see every skeleton in his closet. I leaned forward, my fingers finding the keys again. I initiated a deep backtrace protocol, bypassing his primary servers entirely. I commanded the Aegis network to spider out into the dark web, hunting for every single hidden offshore account, every encrypted shadow corporation, and every anonymous crypto wallet Bradley had ever established. I was going to tear his life apart piece by piece, digital brick by digital brick, to see exactly what kind of monster he truly was. The lines of code cascaded across my screen like a digital waterfall. I bypassed Bradley's secondary encryption with a single keystroke, stripping away the shell corporations he used to launder his clients' money. He had named them things like Apex Innovations and Global Summit Holdings, but they were nothing more than empty digital buckets. I commanded the Aegis network to follow the money tracing the frantic transfers Bradley had made over the last 48 hours. David's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Boss, we are hitting the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. It is a complete mess. He is routing funds through cryptocurrency mixers, trying to mask the origin points, but he is leaving massive gaps in the blockchain ledger. He is terrified. Keep digging." I instructed, my eyes locked on the rapidly populating data trees. "I want to see exactly whose blood he is draining to keep this corpse alive." The screen split into a dozen different diagnostic windows. I watched as the Aegis algorithms reconstructed Bradley's financial timeline. He was not just losing money to bad investments. He was actively stealing from his newest clients to pay off a massive, highly illegal margin call that was threatening to expose him to the Securities and Exchange Commission. The walls were closing in on him, and he had resorted to absolute cannibalism to survive. But the most disturbing part was the origin of his latest cash infusion. Just 2 weeks ago, Apex Capital had received a massive wire transfer. It was the exact amount Bradley needed to temporarily satisfy his offshore creditors and keep the SEC off his back. I highlighted the routing number, a cold sense of anticipation settling over me. I ran a reverse trace on the transaction, peeling back the layers of bank authorizations and wire approvals. When the names attached to the origin account flashed onto my monitor, the breath hitched in my throat. Deacon and Yolanda Woods, my parents. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew they had invested their retirement savings with Bradley. They bragged about it constantly, treating it like an exclusive club membership. But this transfer was not their retirement portfolio. This was fresh liquid capital, and it was a staggering amount of money. It was more money than my father had earned in his entire 30-year career as a mid-level corporate manager. I opened a new terminal and ran a comprehensive background check on my parents' financial footprint. The Aegis system pulled their credit reports, property deeds, and banking histories in less than 10 seconds. The truth materialized on my screen, ugly and undeniable. Bradley had not just taken their retirement. He and Kendra had convinced my parents to sign over the deed to their home, the house I grew up in, the sprawling, meticulously decorated property that my mother treated as her ultimate status symbol. It was heavily mortgaged. Just 14 days ago, a predatory lending firm had approved a massive home equity line of credit against the property. The signature on the digital authorization forms belonged to my father, but the IP address used to submit the application traced straight back to Bradley's penthouse in Buckhead. Bradley and Kendra had drained every single cent of equity out of my parents' home. They had taken the money, funneled it through a maze of dummy accounts, and dumped it directly into the dying carcass of Apex Capital Management to cover Bradley's fraudulent debts. I stared at the screen, a chilling realization washing over me. My parents were completely bankrupt. They were functionally homeless. The bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings the moment Bradley missed the first exorbitant interest payment, which, given his current insolvency, would be exactly 30 days from now. And the absolute most pathetic part of it all, my parents had no idea. They had likely signed the paperwork thinking they were participating in some elite high-yield investment strategy that Bradley had graciously offered them. Kendra had probably smiled her perfect venomous smile and told them it was a guaranteed return. They trusted her completely. They worshipped Bradley. They practically rolled out the red carpet for the man who was currently stealing the roof over their heads. Just an hour ago, my father had stood in the middle of a crowded ballroom and called me a mistake. He had roared that I was a massive disappointment and told me I was dead to him, all to protect the fragile ego of the son-in-law who had just financially ruined him. My mother had hurled insults at me, desperate to preserve her proximity to Kendra's fake wealth. They threw away their actual daughter to defend the parasites who were bleeding them dry. A dark, humorless smile touched the corners of my mouth. The sheer poetic justice of it was almost too perfect to believe. Boss David's voice broke through my thoughts. The offshore trace is complete. We have the entire ledger. Every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every illegal wire transfer. We have enough evidence to put him away for 3 lifetimes. What is the play? Do we forward the packet to the FBI? I looked at the flashing cursor on my screen. Sending this to the authorities would be the responsible thing to do. The FBI would raid Apex Capital, freeze the assets, and drag Bradley out of his mansion in handcuffs. It would be swift and clean. But I did not want clean. I wanted total, undeniable devastation. Bradley had tried to violate the sanctity of my home and threaten my husband. He had promised to bankrupt me. Kendra had publicly humiliated me on my wedding day, parading a surveillance device around as a joke while actively stealing my parents' future. Sending them to jail immediately was too easy. They needed to feel the ground crumble beneath their feet. They needed to watch their fake empire burn to ash, and they needed to know exactly who lit the match. Not yet, I told David, my fingers resting lightly on the keyboard. Quarantine the ledger. Lock down his access to every single offshore account. I want you to change the encryption keys on his personal banking portals and freeze his corporate assets. Do not drain the accounts. Just lock the doors from the outside. Understood. David said, the rapid clatter of his typing filling the audio feed. He is officially locked out of his own money. He cannot move a single cent. Good, I replied. Now initiate a scheduled data dump. I want anonymous emails sent to every single one of Apex Capital's high-profile investors. Send them the real financial reports. Show them exactly where their money went. Schedule the release for exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. By the time Bradley woke up and checked his phone, his entire world would be on fire. His investors would be screaming for their money, his accounts would be frozen, and he would have absolutely nowhere to run. And then I was going to deal with Kendra. She thought she was the untouchable golden child. She thought her proximity to Bradley made her superior. She was about to find out that she had tied her entire identity to a sinking ship, and I was the one holding the only life raft. My phone lit up again. Another text, this time from Kendra. You are a pathetic, jealous loser, Zariah. Bradley is calling his lawyers right now. You are going to pay for what you did tonight. Do not ever speak to me or Mom and Dad again. I picked up the phone. For the first time all night, I typed a response. Enjoy your mansion, Kendra, while it lasts. I hit send, tossed the phone onto the granite counter, and closed my laptop. The war was officially on, and I had already won. I just needed to wait for the sun to rise so they could see the ashes. The sprawling, meticulously landscaped lawns of my parents' estate looked picture perfect as I pulled my car up the winding, oak-lined driveway. From a distance, the massive brick colonial stood as a monument to traditional family values and upper-class success. The autumn leaves burned in brilliant shades of amber and gold, framing the property in a warm, inviting glow. But as I parked my modest sedan behind Bradley's gleaming silver Porsche, the chill in the air had nothing to do with the November weather. My mother had called me 2 days prior, her voice dripping with that manufactured syrupy sweetness she usually reserved for country club luncheons. She insisted that I attend our traditional Sunday Thanksgiving dinner. She claimed the family needed to heal. She said we needed to put the ugliness of the wedding behind us and move forward through the grace of forgiveness. There was, of course, one non-negotiable condition. I had to come alone. Marcus was explicitly not invited. She framed it as wanting to focus strictly on blood relatives. But I knew the truth. They were terrified of my husband. They wanted me isolated, cornered, and entirely without backup. I knew exactly what this was. It was an ambush. And I walked right into it, completely unarmed, carrying nothing but a bottle of sparkling cider and the cold, absolute certainty of a woman who already held the winning hand. I pushed open the heavy mahogany front door, instantly hit by the overwhelming scent of roasted turkey sage stuffing and my mother's expensive floral perfume. The foyer was unnervingly quiet. I walked into the formal dining room where the table was already set with Yolanda's finest fine china and crystal goblets. They were waiting for me. My father Deacon sat at the head of the long table, his posture rigid, his face carved into a deep scowl of perpetual disappointment. Yolanda sat to his right, her hands folded neatly over a pristine lace napkin. Across from her sat Kendra and Bradley, the golden couple, but the pristine illusion they projected at my wedding had severely cracked. Kendra looked entirely too thin, her perfectly styled hair unable to hide the dark, exhausted circles under her eyes. Bradley looked even worse. He was wearing $1,000 tailored suit, but it hung on his frame differently today. His skin had a sickly grayish pallor, and the constant arrogant smirk he usually wore had been replaced by a tight, nervous grimace. The cyber attack I had launched weeks ago had decimated his shadow operations. I knew for a fact that his offshore accounts were still locked in a digital purgatory. I knew his elite investors were currently tearing him apart behind closed doors, demanding explanations for the sudden, inexplicable freeze on their assets. But Bradley was a master manipulator. He had somehow managed to stall the Securities and Exchange Commission, likely spinning a frantic web of lies about unexpected server migrations and temporary technical glitches. More importantly, he had completely brainwashed my parents. He had convinced them that his current financial crisis was entirely my fault. "Sit down, Zaria," my father commanded, not bothering with a greeting. He gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table, as far away from the rest of them as physically possible. I took my seat in silence, placing my napkin in my lap. Nobody reached for the food. The roasted turkey sat in the center of the table, growing cold. "We brought you here today because we are giving you one final chance to make things right," Yolanda began, her voice trembling with manufactured grief. "I have hardly been able to show my face at church since the stunt you and your violent husband pulled at your reception. You humiliated this family. You humiliated your sister. And what you did to Bradley is completely unforgivable." I looked at my mother, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. "What exactly did I do to Bradley, Mother?" Deacon slammed his palm flat against the table. "Do not play dumb with us. Bradley told us everything. He told us how you used your little computer skills to hack into his firm's private servers. He told us how you launched an illegal cyber attack out of pure bitter jealousy to sabotage his business. You slandered him at your wedding, and then you committed corporate espionage." I shifted my gaze to Bradley. He refused to meet my eyes, opting instead to stare intensely at his empty crystal water glass. He had actually convinced them that the backdoor interceptor he tried to plant in my home was just a harmless prank, and that I had retaliated by destroying his legitimate hedge fund out of spite. It was a staggering level of delusion. My parents were so desperate to cling to his wealth that they willingly ignored the fact that he had weaponized their own home equity to cover his massive fraudulent debts. "Your sister and her husband have been going through absolute hell because of your vindictive behavior," Yolanda chimed in, pointing a manicured finger at me. "Bradley has had to freeze his investors' accounts just to protect them from your malicious hacking. You put his entire livelihood at risk. You put our investments at risk. You are a toxic, destructive force in this family, Zaria." Kendra finally spoke up, her voice laced with venom. "You have always been obsessed with tearing me down. You could not stand the fact that I married a successful man while you settled for a government employee. So you tried to frame Bradley. You tried to make him look like a criminal." I sat there breathing evenly, letting their words wash over me. It was fascinating in a clinical, detached sort of way to watch a group of people aggressively defend the very man who was actively burying them alive. I did not interrupt. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I just let the silence stretch out, forcing them to sit in the suffocating weight of their own lies. Bradley finally cleared his throat. He sat up straighter, attempting to summon the bloated arrogance that usually defined his personality. He reached into his leather briefcase resting on the floor beside his chair and pulled out a thick, legal-sized manila folder. He tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table right next to the turkey. "That is a finalized civil lawsuit," Bradley said, his voice carrying a shaky, desperate edge. "It details a comprehensive list of charges against you for unauthorized network intrusion, corporate sabotage, and severe financial damages. My legal team is ready to file it with the federal court first thing tomorrow morning. I have digital logs that trace the attack directly back to your IP address. You are looking at a decade in federal prison, Zariah. Your pathetic little repair shop will be liquidated and you will be ruined." My father nodded approvingly. "You brought this on yourself," he stated, looking at me with pure disdain. However, Bradley continued, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "Because you are Kendra's sister, and because Yolanda and Deacon begged me to show you mercy, I am willing to offer you a way out. I am willing to make this entire lawsuit disappear." Bradley reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out a small, sleek metallic USB drive and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped exactly 1 inch from my plate. I stared at the silver drive. "What is this?" I asked softly. "It is a simple software patch," Bradley replied, his eyes gleaming with a feverish, terrified kind of hope. "A management program. My investors are demanding a specific level of collateral to overlook the damage you caused to my servers. They need assurance. All you have to do is take that drive, go home, and plug it into your husband's secure military terminal for exactly 60 seconds. The room went entirely still. The sheer breathtaking magnitude of his treason hung in the air. "You want me to plug an unauthorized flash drive into a Department of Defense classified network?" I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "It is just an automated script," Bradley insisted quickly, his breathing becoming shallow. "It just runs a quick diagnostic sweep to verify his security clearance level as collateral for my offshore backers. It will not harm anything. It leaves no trace. You plug it in, you wait 1 minute, and you pull it out. You do that for me, and I drop the lawsuit. I forgive the cyber attack. You get to keep your freedom, and your family gets to stay intact." I looked down at the tiny piece of metal resting on the table. Bradley was not trying to verify a clearance level. He was trying to upload a remote access Trojan directly into the Pentagon's most secure servers. His Ponzi scheme had officially imploded. His offshore creditors were demanding their money, and he was trying to sell United States military intelligence to foreign buyers to save his own life. He was actively trying to turn me into a domestic terrorist. The silence in the formal dining room was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I looked down at the sleek, metallic USB drive resting on the polished mahogany table, then up at Bradley's sweating, desperate face. He actually believed I would do it. My father leaned forward, tapping his heavy knuckles impatiently against the wood. My mother shifted in her seat, adjusting her expensive pearls, preparing to deliver the killing blow. They had positioned themselves perfectly around me. Deacon at the head of the table, Yolanda flanking my right, Bradley and Kendra boxing me in from across the spread of untouched, cooling Thanksgiving food. It felt as though the walls of my childhood home were physically shrinking, pressing them closer, surrounding me in a suffocating circle of absolute expectation. "Take the drive, Zariah," my father ordered, his voice echoing with the unyielding authority he believed he still possessed. "It is a simple software verification. You owe your brother-in-law that much after the chaos you caused at your own wedding." I did not move. I did not blink. My refusal to immediately reach for the drive ignited a familiar, venomous spark in my mother's eyes. Yolanda slammed her flat palm down next to her crystal water goblet, the silverware rattling against the fine china. "You are going to do exactly as you are told," she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "You are going to take that drive, and you are going to fix this. You owe this family. You owe your sister. You have always been so selfish, so incredibly focused on your own petty grievances. Do you remember when you were 18? Do you remember the academic scholarship you won?" I kept my gaze locked on her, letting her spin her toxic web, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. You were supposed to go to that prestigious out-of-state university? Yolanda continued, her tone dripping with righteous indignation. But we needed that money. We needed the tuition funds we had saved to send Kendra to Paris for her study abroad program. We told you to decline the scholarship to stay home and attend the local community college so your sister could have the cultural education she deserved. And you fought us tooth and nail. You cried and screamed like a spoiled child refusing to see the bigger picture. You had to be forced to do the right thing for this family. You had to be forced to make a sacrifice. Well, consider this your chance to finally make amends. You will take that drive, Zariah. You will secure your brother-in-law's investments, and you will apologize to your sister for ever making her doubt her own standing in this family. I stared at Yolanda. She actually believed her own twisted narrative. She truly believed that stripping away my future, burying my potential to fund a frivolous European vacation for Kendra, was a noble family sacrifice. They had spent decades conditioning me to be the scapegoat, the sacrificial lamb whose only purpose was to absorb their failures and fund their illusions of grandeur. I looked back down at the silver USB drive. I did not touch it. Instead, I let out a low, humorless laugh that sliced through the heavy tension of the dining room. "You really think I am that stupid, Bradley?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You think I do not know exactly what this is?" Bradley's jaw tightened. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, catching the light from the chandelier. "It is a diagnostic patch, I told you." "Do not insult my intelligence," I snapped, leaning forward. I matched his posture but dominated the space with absolute certainty. "That is not a patch. That is a remote access Trojan, a highly sophisticated military-grade malware payload. You want me to plug that into a secure Department of Defense terminal. You want me to compromise a Navy SEAL commander's network access. The moment I insert that drive, it will bypass the local firewalls and grant an external user a direct, unmonitored backdoor into the Pentagon's intelligence database." My father stood up his chair, scraping loudly. His face flushed a violent shade of red. "How dare you accuse him of treason? He is trying to save his business from your malicious attacks." "Sit down, Deacon," I commanded. The sharpness of my tone was so sudden, so completely devoid of my usual passive compliance, that my father actually dropped back into his chair, stunned into silence. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Bradley. His skin had gone completely pale, matching the color of the linen tablecloth. "Let us talk about your business, Bradley. Let us talk about Apex Capital Management. It is completely insolvent. You have been running a Ponzi scheme for years, using new investor money to pay off the old ones. But the well dried up, did it not? You started skimming from the top to fund your private jets and Kendra's designer wardrobe. And then you made a very fatal mistake. You borrowed money from the wrong people." The atmosphere in the room shifted from expectant anger to sheer terror. Kendra looked at her husband, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing her carefully contoured face. "Bradley, what is she talking about? Tell her to shut up." Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the front door, as if calculating his escape route. I did not let him speak. "You owe millions to an offshore syndicate." I continued, laying out his miserable reality piece by piece. "A cartel that does not care about your country club membership or your tailored suits. They want their money. And when you could not pay, they gave you an ultimatum. Provide them with highly classified, actionable military intelligence they can sell on the black market, or they will bury you in the desert. That is exactly why you brought that ridiculous decorative wedding box to my reception. You needed to plant a surveillance bug in my home to monitor Marcus. You were hoping to catch him discussing classified troop movements or weapons contracts. But Marcus is a professional, and your amateur bug yielded absolutely nothing. So now you are desperate. Your creditors are knocking on the door, your hedge fund is bleeding out, and your last resort is trying to blackmail me into committing federal treason to save your own skin." Yolanda was shaking her head rapidly, clutching her napkin against her chest as if struggling for air. "No, no, that is a lie. You are making this up. Bradley manages our retirement. He is a financial genius. You are just jealous." I ignored her, keeping my gaze fixed on Bradley, who was currently gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. You are a cornered rat, Bradley. I am not taking your drive. I am not saving your life. I am going to sit here and watch you drown. The brutal reality of his failure finally shattered the delicate illusion holding the room together. Kendra abruptly stood up. Her heavy dining chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. Her face was contorted with a mixture of raw terror and absolute unhinged rage. She could not accept the truth. Accepting the truth meant accepting that her entire identity, her extreme wealth, her elevated social status, was a criminal fabrication. It meant accepting that the man she married was a fraud. "Shut up!" Kendra screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical, vibrating with panic. "Shut your lying mouth. You have always tried to destroy me. You have always been a bitter, pathetic loser who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." She rounded the table, her expensive high heels clicking rapidly against the wood. I remained perfectly still watching her approach. She was shaking with fury, her hands balled into tight fists. My mother cried out her name but made no move to stop her. "You are not going to ruin my life!" Kendra shrieked, stopping mere inches from my face. "Bradley is a good man. He provides for this family. He provides for Mom and Dad. He gave them everything. You give them nothing but grief." She raised her hand and struck me across the face. The slap was loud, a sharp, stinging crack that echoed off the dining room walls. My head snapped to the side. A brief, hot flare of pain blossomed across my cheekbone. I did not flinch. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. Her chest was heaving, her eyes wide with a frantic, desperate energy. "Get out!" Kendra gasped, pointing a shaking finger toward the front door. "Get out of this house. This is my house. This property belongs to me and my husband. We pay for everything. We own this family. You are nothing. Get out and never come back." The sting on my cheek was a dull, localized heat, a physical manifestation of a severed tie. I slowly turned my face back to the center of the room. I did not raise my hand to cradle my face. I did not flinch, and I certainly did not cry. Instead, a slow, icy smile spread across my lips. It was a hollow, calculating expression that instantly sucked the remaining oxygen out of the formal dining room. Kendra took a step back, her bravado faltering as she realized she had not broken me. She had just handed me the match to burn her entire world to the ground. I reached down to the sleek leather tote bag I had rested against the leg of my chair. Without breaking eye contact with my sister, I pulled out a heavy, thick stack of paper bound by a stark black clip. I raised it and let it drop flat onto the center of the mahogany table. The heavy thud made Yolanda's crystal water goblets rattle against the fine china. "Look at the papers, Dad," I commanded, my voice slicing through the heavy, stagnant air. "I am not asking you to take my word for it. Read them. They are verified bank statements from Apex Capital Management, cross-referenced with your personal home equity line of credit." My father glared at me. His jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. He refused to look down at the stack. He sat paralyzed by his own stubborn pride, completely unwilling to entertain the possibility that his golden son-in-law was a criminal. "Bradley did not just lose your retirement money through bad investments." I continued, my words sharp and deliberate. 2 weeks ago, he took out a massive second mortgage on this exact house. He forged the secondary authorizations using your digital signatures and drained every single drop of equity you spent 30 years building. He funneled it directly into his failing hedge fund to appease the cartel he owes millions to. He sold your future to buy himself a few extra days of breathing room. Yolanda scoffed, a loud grating sound that vibrated with forced, frantic bravado. "This is another one of your sick, pathetic fabrications. Bradley would never do such a thing. He is a financial genius. You printed these out in your little shop to frame him because you are a jealous, spiteful woman." Deacon immediately joined in, emboldened by my mother's blind denial. "You bring forged documents to our Thanksgiving table after your sister graciously invited you into her home. You are a pathological liar, Zariah. Bradley handles our finances because he understands high-level wealth management. You fix computers for a living. Do not pretend you understand the complexities of corporate investments. You are making a fool of yourself." It was staggering to witness. They were staring directly at the loaded gun Bradley had pressed to their heads, and they were blaming me for pointing it out. I shifted my gaze to Bradley. He was physically shrinking into his expensive tailored suit. His eyes were glued to the black clip binding the documents. He knew exactly what was in that stack. He knew I had the routing numbers, the offshore transfer logs, and the forged IP addresses. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some smooth, well-practiced lie, but his voice failed him. Only a raspy, panicked breath escaped his throat. Kendra clung to Bradley's arm, acting the wounded victim, her eyes darting between my calm demeanor and her husband's sudden, terrifying silence. Bradley, tell them she is lying. Tell them to throw her out. I stepped closer to the table, leaning my weight onto my palms, looking down at the people who shared my DNA but possessed none of my loyalty. Open the folder. Deacon, call your bank right now. Put them on speakerphone. Ask them about the balance on your mortgage. Ask them why your primary checking accounts were flagged for insufficient funds on Thursday afternoon. Ask them why your credit score dropped 200 points in 48 hours. Yolanda stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the wood floor. She pointed a trembling manicured finger at my chest. We will do no such thing. Bradley is a good man. He bought us those first-class plane tickets to Aspen last winter. He paid for the country club renovations. He treats us with the respect we deserve. You have given us nothing but headaches and embarrassment since the day you dropped out of the family business. You are a disgrace to this family, Zariah. You are trying to destroy your sister's marriage because yours is so miserable. Get out of our house before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I let her finish. I waited until the echo of her shouting faded into the high vaulted ceilings of the dining room. I let the absolute silence stretch out for 10 agonizing seconds, ensuring they felt the full weight of their own arrogance. Then I reached out and tapped the very top sheet of paper in the stack. Your house, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and perfectly even. Yolanda, you have not owned this house since Friday morning. The confusion on my mother's face was immediate. She blinked, her hand dropping slowly to her side. What are you talking about? I picked up Bradley's useless, malicious USB drive and tossed it into the trash can resting in the corner of the room. The predatory lending firm Bradley used to secure that fraudulent mortgage realized Apex Capital was entirely insolvent. 3 days ago, I explained, enunciating every word, so there could be absolutely no misunderstanding. They saw the massive freeze on his offshore assets. They realized the collateral was worthless. They immediately triggered an accelerated default clause. They foreclosed on this property at exactly 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The bank auctioned off the bad debt by noon to recoup their losses before the market caught wind of Bradley's collapse. My father's face drained of color. He finally looked down at the stack of papers. The word foreclosure was printed in bold black ink on the top page. No, he whispered, the absolute certainty in his voice finally cracking. That is not possible. There is a process. There are notices. When you sign a high-risk, unregulated shadow loan with criminal syndicates, Deacon, they waive the standard 30-day notice, I replied coldly. Bradley signed away your rights to expedite the cash transfer. I reached into the inside pocket of my tailored jacket and pulled out one final document. It was enclosed in a crisp blue legal folder. I laid it gently on top of the stack. Fortunately, the private holding company that purchased your bad debt from the bank on Friday afternoon belongs to Aegis Cyber Defense, I said, watching their eyes track my movement. My company, my money. I paid the bank in full in cash. I looked around the lavish dining room. I looked at the antique crystal chandelier hanging above us, the heavy silk drapes framing the bay windows, the expensive china my mother treasured more than her own children. And finally, I looked at the pale, horrified faces of the people who had just spent the last 20 minutes actively defending the man who ruined them. I am the sole legal owner of this property, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. You do not own these walls. You do not own this roof. You are currently trespassing in my home. I tapped the blue legal folder once with my index finger. You have exactly 48 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate my property, I told them, watching the reality of their destruction finally set in. If you or Bradley or Kendra are still inside this house by 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I will have the county sheriff remove you by force. I watched the color completely drain from my father's face. The authoritative, overbearing patriarch, who had spent my entire life dictating my worth, was suddenly reduced to a trembling hollow shell. His eyes darted from the blue legal folder on the table to Bradley, searching desperately for a denial. He wanted Bradley to laugh to call my bluff, to assure him that his wealth and his home were perfectly secure. Bradley said absolutely nothing. He stared at the floor, his breathing ragged and shallow. Deacon's hand shook violently as he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his phone. He placed it flat on the mahogany table, right next to the documentation I had provided, and hit the speakerphone button. He dialed the direct private line for his wealth management concierge at the bank. The dial tone echoed loudly in the cavernous dining room. 1 ring, 2 rings. Yolanda gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her expensive pearls clicking softly against her collarbone as she leaned forward. Kendra stood frozen, her hand still raised slightly from where she had just struck my face, her bravado evaporating into a terrible creeping realization. Thank you for calling Premier Client Services. This is Richard. How may I assist you today? Richard, this is Deacon Woods, my father said, his voice cracking, stripping away decades of cultivated arrogance. I need you to verify my account balances immediately, all of them, and I need the status of my home equity line of credit. My daughter is sitting here telling me some absurd story about a foreclosure. There was a long, excruciating pause on the other end of the line. The sound of rapid typing filtered through the small speaker. Mr. Woods, the representative, began, his tone losing its practiced corporate warmth and shifting into cautious professionalism. I am looking at your file right now. Sir, your primary checking, savings, and retirement accounts were flagged for insufficient funds on Thursday afternoon. The current available balance across all linked accounts is 0. Yolanda let out a sharp, breathless gasp, clutching her chest. Deacon swallowed hard, and the house deacon demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. What about the house? Sir, the representative said, his voice dropping lower. The home equity line of credit secured against your property went into critical default. The funds were transferred directly to an offshore holding account associated with Apex Capital Management. Because the loan was structured under an accelerated high-risk tier, the lending institution exercised their right to immediate foreclosure. The property was auctioned in a closed bidding session on Friday morning. The deed was transferred to Aegis Holdings. I am so sorry, Mr. Woods. We tried to reach you, but the contact information on file had been altered to route to a different address. Deacon ended the call. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and suffocating. The reality of their total ruin settled over the table like a lead weight. Yolanda's knees buckled. She collapsed back into her dining chair, staring blankly at the cold Thanksgiving turkey, the fine china, the crystal goblets. She was looking at a life she no longer owned. Her entire identity was built on country club memberships, luxury vacations, and the perception of generational wealth. In 60 seconds, it had all been vaporized. We have nothing, Yolanda whispered, her voice trembling. Deacon, he took everything. We are bankrupt. The shock in the room hung suspended for exactly 5 seconds before it violently transformed into rage. The Golden family, the flawless unit that had spent their entire lives unified in their disdain for me, instantly turned on each other like starving wolves. Kendra whipped around to face her husband. The flawless upper-class socialite facade melted away, revealing the raw, ugly panic of a woman who realized her entire existence was a lie. She lunged at Bradley, grabbing the lapels of his $1,000 suit. You lied to me! Kendra screamed, her voice tearing through the room. You told me we were richer than God. You told me Apex was expanding. You bought me diamonds last week. You let me plan a vacation to Milan. You stole my parents' house. Bradley tried to pry her hands off his suit, his face contorted in panic. Kendra, calm down. I can fix this. I just needed liquidity. The market shifted and I had to cover a margin call. I was going to put the money back before they even noticed. You stole from my parents. Kendra shrieked, striking him hard across the chest. You bankrupt us. My friends are going to find out. The country club is going to know. You made me look like a fool. You are a fraud. She shoved him backward. Bradley stumbled his heel, catching the edge of the plush Persian rug, and he crashed hard into the antique credenza. A priceless porcelain vase wobbled and shattered onto the hardwood floor, the sound sharp and violent. Deacon stood up. The shock had burned out of his system, leaving only blind, murderous fury. The man who had just spent the last 20 minutes defending Bradley's honor now looked ready to kill him. Deacon marched around the table and grabbed Bradley by the throat, hauling him up from the shattered porcelain. I gave you my savings, Deacon roared, spittle flying from his lips. I trusted you. I let you marry my daughter. I defended you against my own flesh and blood. You took my home. You took 30 years of my hard work, and you threw it into a fire. Deacon, please, Bradley choked out, struggling against my father's grip. I was trying to protect the family investments. I had offshore backers putting pressure on me. If I did not pay them, they were going to come after me. They were going to come after Kendra. I had no choice. You arrogant, parasitic thief, Deacon shouted, shoving Bradley hard against the wall. I will see you rot in federal prison. I will testify against you myself. I stood perfectly still at the end of the table, my arms crossed over my chest. I watched the absolute carnage unfold. It was a masterpiece of self-destruction. I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to hurl insults. I had simply placed the truth on the table and let their inherent greed and narcissism do the rest. They were tearing each other apart, devouring the very lies they had built their lives upon. Yolanda was sobbing uncontrollably into her hands, rocking back and forth in her chair, mourning her lost status. Kendra was screaming at the top of her lungs, throwing a heavy silver serving spoon at Bradley's head, shattering a framed landscape painting on the wall behind him. Deacon was threatening to kill the man he had called a son, just an hour ago. In the midst of the violent, screaming chaos, Bradley managed to tear himself away from my father's grasp. His tailored suit was torn at the collar. His expensive tie was skewed. He looked like a beaten, terrified animal. He backed away toward the foyer, his chest heaving, holding his hands up in a desperate attempt to ward off Deacon and Kendra, but as he retreated, his eyes locked onto mine. The sheer desperation in his gaze made the hair on my arms stand up. His eyes were bloodshot, manic, and completely devoid of reason. He was not just looking at a ruined business or an angry family. He was looking at a death sentence. The cartel he owed money to did not care about SEC regulations or family drama. They cared about their cash, and Bradley had failed to deliver. He had begged me to install the remote access Trojan on Marcus's secure terminal. He needed that military intelligence to buy his life back from the people he had stolen from. And I had just publicly denied him his only lifeline. Bradley did not say another word. He turned and bolted out the front door, leaving it wide open to the cold November wind. I heard the frantic screech of tires on the asphalt as he threw his Porsche into reverse and tore down the driveway, desperate to escape the immediate wrath of my father. I watched the empty doorway, a cold, sharp realization settling over my skin. Bradley was out of options, out of money, and completely out of time. He was a dead man walking unless he got his hands on Pentagon data. If he could not manipulate me into planting the Trojan, he would have to acquire the intelligence himself. He knew Marcus kept a physical encrypted hard drive locked in our home office safe. He knew Marcus was currently out of town at a security briefing. And he knew I was currently standing in my parents' dining room an hour away from my own house. The terrified, manic look in his red-rimmed eyes suddenly made perfect sense. Bradley was not running away to hide. He was running out of sheer, panicked necessity. He had nothing left to lose. He was going to break into my house tonight, and he was going to take what he needed to survive. The icy November wind whipped through the barren branches of the oak trees, completely masking the sound of Bradley's ragged, panicked breathing. He had ditched his gleaming silver Porsche 3 blocks away, hastily parallel parking it in the shadows of a defunct strip mall. He could not risk Zariah's exterior security cameras picking up his license plate. His $1,000 tailored suit jacket was gone, abandoned somewhere on the leather passenger seat. His silk tie was violently yanked loose, hanging around his neck like a frayed noose. His pristine dress shirt was plastered to his skin with cold, terrified sweat. He was no longer the arrogant, untouchable hedge fund manager who held court at country club galas. He was a cornered animal operating entirely on the primal, blinding instinct of survival. He gripped the heavy iron tire iron in his right hand. The cold metal bit into his palm, grounding him in the violent reality of what he was about to do. The offshore cartel did not deal in second chances. They did not care about his frozen assets or the spectacular implosion of his marriage that had just occurred in his in-laws' dining room. They only cared about the data. If he did not deliver the military intelligence they demanded by sunrise, they would not bother with lawsuits or foreclosure notices. They would simply make him disappear. Bradley crept along the side of Zariah's property, pressing his back against the cold brick. The house was infuriatingly modest compared to the sprawling estate he had just been evicted from, but right now it looked like an impenetrable fortress. Every window was dark, the neighborhood was dead quiet. He knew Marcus was completely out of the picture, isolated at a secure naval briefing facility on the coast. He also knew Zariah had just driven back from the Thanksgiving ambush. She had to be exhausted. She had to be asleep in the master bedroom on the second floor, smugly celebrating her absolute victory. She had outplayed him at the table, but she had severely underestimated his desperation. He reached the back patio. The heavy sliding glass door was locked tight. He paused, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He expected the harsh, piercing shriek of a perimeter alarm the moment he stepped onto the deck, but the night remained dead silent. He scanned the corners of the eaves, looking for the blinking red lights of motion sensors. There were none. Zariah was a cybersecurity expert, a woman who lived and breathed digital fortifications, yet she had completely neglected her physical perimeter. The sheer blinding arrogance of it made Bradley want to laugh. She had been so focused on tearing down his digital empire that she had left her own physical sanctuary completely vulnerable. He raised the iron bar. He aimed for the bottom corner of the glass right near the locking mechanism and struck it with a short, brutal jab. The glass spiderwebbed with a sharp, muted crack. He struck it again, harder this time. The pane shattered inward, dropping shards onto the hardwood floor inside with a sound that seemed deafening to his hyperactive senses. He froze, flattening himself against the exterior wall, his chest heaving. He waited for the interior alarms to blare. He waited for the floodlights to snap on. He waited for the sound of Zariah rushing down the stairs. 10 seconds passed, then 20, nothing but the howling wind. He reached his gloved hand through the jagged hole, found the internal latch, and flipped it upward. The heavy door slid open on its tracks with a soft metallic whisper. Bradley stepped over the threshold, his expensive leather shoes crunching softly against the broken glass. He was inside. The air in the house was warm and smelled faintly of vanilla and roasted sage. It was sickeningly domestic. He tightened his grip on the tire iron, his eyes rapidly adjusting to the pitch-black interior. He navigated through the dark kitchen, his adrenaline surging so intensely that his vision actually blurred at the edges. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. He moved down the central hallway, his memory mapping out the floor plan from the few times he had been forced to attend their painfully middle-class dinner parties. The master bedroom was upstairs at the end of the hall. The home office was on the ground floor, tucked away behind a heavy oak door just past the living room. That was Marcus's sanctuary. That was where the Department of Defense terminal was located. Bradley reached the office door. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of profound darkness cutting through the ambient shadows of the hallway. He pushed it open with his shoulder, wincing at the faint squeak of the hinges. The room was a masterclass in military precision. Even in the dark, Bradley could make out the immaculate organization. A massive, heavy-duty desk dominated the center of the room. On top of it sat a triple-monitor setup flanked by high-capacity server towers that hummed with a low, steady vibration. The small LED indicators on the towers blinked in a rhythmic, hypnotic pattern. He walked around the desk, his breathing shallow and rapid. He set the tire iron down silently on the carpet. His hands were shaking so violently he had to clench them into fists for a solid 5 seconds just to regain fine motor control. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the sleek silver USB drive, the remote access Trojan, the key to his salvation. He knelt beside the primary terminal. The hardware was heavy, encased in reinforced steel, completely distinct from civilian commercial technology. He located the secure input port on the front panel. His thumb traced the smooth metal of the drive. This was it. 1 minute, 60 seconds of automated upload, and the back door would be permanently embedded in the Navy's classified network. The cartel would pull the data they needed, his debts would be instantly forgiven, and he could vanish before the federal investigators even knew the breach existed. He lined up the drive. He shoved it into the port. The physical click of the connection sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. Instantly, the 3 monitors on the desk flared to life. The sudden, brilliant wash of blue light illuminated Bradley's terrified, sweating face. He scrambled up from the floor, his eyes frantically scanning the center screen. A command prompt window opened automatically. Lines of complex white code began cascading down the blue screen at blinding speed. The Trojan was executing. It was working. The automated script was actively bypassing the primary civilian firewalls and bridging the gap to the encrypted military network. Bradley braced his hands on the edge of the desk, a wave of pure, intoxicating relief crashing over him. A hysterical, breathless laugh bubbled up in the back of his throat. He had done it. He had actually outsmarted her. Zariah thought she had utterly destroyed him at that dining table, thought she had backed him into a corner he could never escape. She had forced him into a desperate corner, yes, but that desperation had pushed him to take the ultimate risk, and it was paying off. A progress bar appeared in the center of the screen tracking the payload installation. 10%, 30%, 60%. Bradley watched the green bar fill his heart, hammering a frantic, victorious rhythm against his sternum. He could already picture the look on Zariah's face when the federal agents stormed this house, tracing the catastrophic security breach directly to her husband's terminal. She would lose her company. Marcus would face a court-martial. They would both burn, and Bradley would walk away completely untouched. 80%, 95%. "Come on," Bradley whispered into the glowing silence, his voice trembling with manic anticipation. "Come on, finish it. 100%. The green progress bar vanished. The quiet, steady hum of the server towers abruptly stopped. The total silence in the room was sudden and deafening. Bradley frowned, leaning closer to the center monitor. The lines of executing code had frozen. The command prompt window hung entirely suspended. Then the blue light died. All 3 monitors instantly slammed to pitch black. Bradley flinched, stepping back from the desk. "No." He muttered, panic instantly clawing its way back up his throat. "No, no, no. Start up. Run the protocol." He reached for the mouse, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He clicked the button rapidly, but the cursor was gone. The keyboard was completely dead. The terminal was entirely unresponsive. Suddenly, the center screen flickered. A single bold line of text materialized in the dead center of the black monitor. The font was a glaring, luminous blood red. "Access denied. Target secured." Bradley stared at the crimson words, the blood freezing in his veins. The air in his lungs completely evaporated. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The system was not updating. It was not breached. It was a trap. Before his brain could even begin to process the magnitude of his fatal mistake, the heavy oak door of the office slammed shut with a thunderous crash. The deadbolt engaged with a sharp electronic snap, and then the overhead lights flared blindingly bright. The harsh, clinical glare of the overhead LED panels snapped on with a sharp electronic hum, banishing every shadow in the room. Bradley spun around so violently, he nearly lost his footing, his hand flying up to shield his retinas from the sudden blinding flash. As his pupils contracted and his vision rapidly adjusted, the raw, unfiltered terror that warped his features was an absolute masterpiece to behold. From my vantage point, seated comfortably in the deep recesses of the oversized leather armchair tucked into the corner of the office, I had the perfect unobstructed view of his total unraveling. I rested my elbow on the armrest, holding a long-stemmed crystal glass, filled with a heavy dark Cabernet. I swirled the wine slowly, watching the deep crimson liquid climb the sides of the glass. "You really should have checked the physical perimeter more carefully, Bradley," I stated, my voice a soft, level murmur that sliced effortlessly through the sound of his ragged, frantic breathing. Bradley froze completely. The heavy iron tire iron slipped from his sweating fingers and hit the carpet with a dull, pathetic thud. He stared at me, his chest heaving, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process the reality of the situation. He had walked into my home believing he was a predator in the night, only to discover he had willingly stepped into a cage. "Zarya," he stammered, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "I can explain. I did not mean to. I just needed to borrow the terminal." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the silence stretch out, forcing him to sit in the agonizing weight of his own profound stupidity. "Explain what exactly?" I asked, resting the glass on my knee. "Are you going to explain the breaking and entering, the destruction of private property, the corporate espionage? Or were you going to explain how you genuinely believed that my husband, a high-ranking military intelligence officer, would leave a live, unsecured, unmonitored portal to the Department of Defense mainframe, just sitting on a desk in the suburbs for any desperate, bankrupt hedge fund manager to stumble upon?" Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically between me and the heavy oak door that had just locked him inside. "But the upload," he whispered, gesturing weakly toward the pitch-black monitors. "The screen said it secured the target. The payload went through." I offered him a cold, razor-sharp smile. "It did go through," I confirmed, watching the last shreds of hope cling to his features. "But it did not go to the Pentagon. What you just infected was an isolated, air-gapped sandbox network. It is a digital terrarium I built on a secondary server array 3 days ago. It has zero connection to the outside world, no uplink to any military database, and absolutely no external output. But it was programmed to perfectly mimic the architecture, security protocols, and directory structures of a secure naval intelligence terminal." Bradley's knees buckled slightly. He reached out to grip the edge of the desk to keep himself upright. "You did not breach the United States military, Bradley," I continued, my voice hardening into a lethal strike. "You just walked into a federal honeypot. And in doing so, you willingly handed me the exact source code, the decryption keys, and the unique digital signatures of your cartel's proprietary malware. The software you just uploaded is currently being quarantined, dissected, and analyzed by my firm's automated security protocols. You did not pay off your debt. You just gave the federal government the exact digital fingerprints they need to trace this malware right back to the syndicate holding your leash." The blood completely drained from his face. His skin took on a sickly, translucent gray pallor. The realization of what he had just done hit him with the devastating force of a freight train. He had not just failed to secure the intelligence his creditors demanded, he had actively compromised their entire cyber operation. He had handed their most sophisticated weapon directly to the enemy. "They are going to kill me," Bradley breathed, his voice hollow, his eyes wide with a manic, unhinged horror. "They are going to butcher me. Zarya, you have to let me delete it. You have to let me destroy the server. If they find out I lost the code, they will not just come for me. They will come for Kendra. They will kill your sister. Kendra made her choice when she married a fraud." I replied, my expression remaining completely blank. "And you made your choice when you decided to break into my home and attempt to commit federal treason." Bradley let out a guttural, desperate cry and lunged toward the server tower resting on the floor beside the desk, his hands reaching blindly to rip the power cables from the wall. He did not make it past the edge of the desk. From the deep shadows of the adjoining tactical armory, a figure stepped forward. The heavy, rhythmic thud of combat boots against the hardwood floor resonated through the room. Marcus moved with the silent, lethal grace of a man who had spent his entire adult life operating in the world's most dangerous environments. He did not yell. He did not rush. He simply raised the compact, suppressed tactical rifle he held in his hands and brought the stock to his shoulder. A brilliant pinpoint dot of crimson laser light cut through the air and came to rest dead center on Bradley's chest, hovering exactly over his rapidly beating heart. Bradley froze, his hands suspended inches from the server cables. He slowly raised his head, his eyes locking onto the red dot, illuminating his ruined shirt, then tracking the laser back to the barrel of the rifle and finally up to my husband's face. Marcus's expression was carved out of granite. His eyes were cold flat and completely devoid of mercy. He looked at Bradley, not as a brother-in-law, not as a family member, but as a hostile, neutralized threat. "I told your family that you brought a threat into my home," Marcus stated. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the floorboards, carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "I never said I did not know how to handle it." Bradley slowly raised his hands in the air, backing away from the servers until his shoulders hit the wall. He was trembling so violently that the red laser dot danced erratically across his chest. "Please," Bradley sobbed, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes, carving tracks through the sweat on his face. "Please, Marcus, I am begging you. Let me go. I will disappear. I will leave the country. I will divorce Kendra. You will never see me again. If you hand that code over to the authorities, the cartel will hunt me down to the ends of the earth. I am a dead man." "You were a dead man the moment you decided to weaponize my wife's family against her," Marcus replied, not lowering the rifle a single millimeter. "You were a dead man the moment you decided my home was an acceptable target for your pathetic financial crimes. You do not get to walk away from this, Bradley. You are going to face exactly what you earned." I took a final sip of my wine, savoring the rich, complex flavor, and set the crystal glass down on the side table. I stood up from the leather chair, smoothing the non-existent wrinkles from my trousers. "You thought you could outsmart me, Bradley," I said, walking slowly toward him, stopping just out of arm's reach. "You thought because my parents deemed me the outcast, the failure, that I was weak. You thought you could manipulate my family's greed to crush my business, steal my assets, and frame my husband. But you forgot one very crucial detail. I build security systems that protect nations. Your shadow firm and your borrowed cartel code are nothing but amateur hour." Bradley slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He buried his face in his hands, letting out loud, pathetic, heaving sobs. The golden boy of the family, the financial genius who had commanded the head of the Thanksgiving table just hours ago, was now a broken, sobbing mess on my office floor. Through the thick, soundproofed walls of the house, a faint, rising wail pierced the quiet night. The sound grew louder, multiplying into a chorus of piercing sirens tearing down the suburban streets, hurtling directly toward our property. Bradley snapped his head up, his eyes wide with a renewed surge of panic. He looked toward the front of the house. "You called the police," he choked out. "Zariah, please, the local cops cannot protect me. The cartel has people everywhere. They have people in the precinct. You have to let me run." I looked down at him, my expression hardening into absolute stone. "Those are not the local police, Bradley," I said quietly, as the heavy roar of armored vehicles pulling into my driveway rattled the window panes. "You committed cyber espionage against a simulated Department of Defense network. The moment your Trojan breached my firewall, my system automatically alerted the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI Cyber Task Force." The heavy, synchronized slamming of vehicle doors echoed from the front lawn. The sharp, authoritative shouts of federal agents commanding the perimeter cut through the night air. "They are not here to arrest you for breaking a window," I concluded, turning my back on him. "They are here to detain you for domestic terrorism." The harsh, fluorescent glare of the home office hit Bradley like a physical blow. He scrambled backward, his expensive dress shoes slipping uselessly against the polished hardwood floor until his spine collided with the base of Marcus's heavy oak bookshelf. He threw his hands over his face, letting out a wretched, high-pitched whimper. He was thoroughly broken by the realization that he was not facing local cops, but the full, crushing weight of the federal government. Marcus did not flinch. He kept the tactical rifle locked perfectly steady against his shoulder, the crimson laser dot shifting from Bradley's heaving chest to the dead center of his forehead. I remained leaning against the desk, swirling the last dark sip of my Cabernet, waiting for the inevitable arrival of my so-called family. I did not have to wait long. The sound of heavy tires chewing up the manicured gravel of my driveway cut through the wailing sirens. Car doors slammed with frantic, uncoordinated urgency. Bradley had obviously made a panicked phone call during his desperate, reckless sprint from their foreclosed mansion to my doorstep. The front door of my house, already compromised by Bradley's forced entry, banged violently open against the foyer wall. Footsteps pounded down the hallway, heavy and chaotic. Kendra was the first through the office door, her expensive stilettos snapping against the floorboards. Deacon and Yolanda were right behind her, their faces flushed with righteous indignation. They froze in the doorway, taking in the scene. Bradley was cowering on the floor, weeping uncontrollably into his hands. Marcus was standing like a statue of death with a military-grade rifle leveled at his head. And I was calmly finishing my wine. Instead of grasping the terrifying criminal reality of the situation, their minds instantly warped the narrative to fit their deeply ingrained delusions. They snapped right back into the only dynamic they knew. I was the villain and Bradley was the victim. Kendra let out a piercing, theatrical shriek and threw herself onto the floor beside Bradley. She wrapped her arms around his trembling shoulders, shielding him from the laser sight. "What have you done to him?" she screamed, glaring up at me with absolute venom. "You set him up. You lured him here to frame him. I knew you were vindictive, Zariah, but this is genuinely psychotic." "Put the gun down right now," Deacon commanded, stepping forward with his chest puffed out. He was attempting to summon the patriarchal authority he had used to terrorize me for 30 years, completely oblivious to the fact that he was barking orders at a decorated Navy SEAL. "You are both out of your minds." Bradley sent us a text message on his way over. He told us you were threatening his life, threatening to destroy his legitimate business with your illegal computer games. We are putting an end to this right now. Marcus, if you do not lower that weapon, I will personally call your commanding officer and see you court-martialed. Marcus did not move a single muscle. He simply shifted his eyes toward my father, his gaze so profoundly cold and dead that Deacon instinctively took a half-step backward. Yolanda pushed past my father, her hands flying to her pearl necklace. Her eyes darted toward the front of the house as the blinding flash of red and blue emergency lights began painting the living room walls. The cavalry had arrived, and my mother was entirely ready for her performance. She had spent decades perfecting the role of the aggrieved upper-class matriarch, and she fully intended to use those tears to send me to prison. "Help us!" Yolanda shrieked toward the open hallway, her voice pitching into a perfect manufactured wail of maternal distress. "Somebody help us. My daughter and her violent husband have lost their minds. They are holding us hostage. They are trying to murder my innocent son-in-law. Please, we are unarmed. Help us before they kill us all." I looked at the three of them clustered together in a pathetic knot of entitlement and denial. It was truly fascinating to watch. Even now, with their entire world collapsing, with their mansion repossessed and their bank accounts drained to zero, they believed they could simply lie their way out of federal treason. They actually believed that whoever was stepping out of those vehicles outside would take one look at my weeping mother and my wealthy-appearing father and immediately arrest the black sheep of the family. They thought their social standing made them immune to the law. I slowly set my empty wine glass down on the desk. "You should really save your breath, Mother," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her hysterical fake sobbing. "They do not care about your tears, and they certainly do not care about your fabricated suburban drama." Kendra sneered at me, clutching Bradley tighter. "You are going to jail for a very long time, Zariah. When I tell the police how you hacked into Apex Capital to ruin us, they will lock you away and throw away the key. You are finished." The heavy rhythmic thud of tactical boots echoed through the foyer. It was not the hesitant questioning pace of local patrol officers responding to a domestic disturbance. It was the precise, overwhelming, synchronized march of a highly trained strike team clearing a hot zone. The camera angle slowly pulls back, widening the frame to capture the entire office as the doorway is suddenly flooded with moving bodies. Dozens of heavily armored agents surged into the room, their movements sharp, coordinated, and utterly terrifying. They were not wearing the standard blue uniforms of the local police precinct. They were dressed in heavy black tactical gear, Kevlar vests, and advanced ballistic helmets. They moved past my screaming mother and my stunned father without a single glance of sympathy, their service weapons drawn and ready. As the strike team fanned out, securing the corners of the room and instantly surrounding my shrinking, terrified family, the bold white letters stamped across their tactical armor became glaringly visible under the harsh office lights. FBI. And right beside them, moving with absolute military precision to secure Marcus's terminal, were agents wearing the unmistakable gold and blue insignia of NCIS. The visual perspective of the room seemed to warp a slow, disorienting shift that pulled the background away while magnifying the absolute terrifying calm of my husband's face. Marcus did not blink. The chaotic swirl of red and blue emergency lights reflecting off the broken glass of the patio door did nothing to break his iron focus. Yolanda was screaming at the top of her lungs, her voice shrill and desperate as she threw herself toward the closest tactical officer. She grabbed the sleeve of his heavy black ballistic vest, pointing a manicured finger directly at Marcus. "Arrest him!" My mother wailed, tears streaming down her carefully powdered cheeks, playing the victim with Oscar-worthy precision. "He has a gun. He is a violent, unstable man. He and my daughter lured us here. They are trying to extort us. They are holding my son-in-law hostage. Put him in handcuffs. Do your jobs." The towering federal agent did not even look at her. He simply raised his heavily armored forearm and shoved Yolanda backward with a rigid professional force that sent her stumbling into Deacon's chest. "Secure the perimeter," the lead FBI agent barked, his voice booming over the chaos. "Move these civilians against the far wall. Keep their hands visible." Two heavily armed agents instantly flanked my parents and Kendra, gripping them by their shoulders and forcefully guiding them away from the center of the room. Deacon shouted indignantly, demanding to speak to their supervisor, citing his golf club connections with local politicians. The agents responded by kicking his legs apart and patting him down for weapons, treating the former patriarch of our family with the exact same aggressive indifference they would afford a common street criminal. The lead NCIS agent, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a sharp, calculating gaze, stepped past the struggling cluster of my family. She walked directly up to the barrel of the tactical rifle. She did not draw her own weapon. Instead, she stopped 2 feet away from Marcus, snapped her heels together, and delivered a crisp, formal salute. "Target perimeter is locked down." "Commander," the NCIS agent reported, her voice ringing with absolute respect. "The extraction teams have surrounded the property. We have federal warrants secured for all related offshore accounts, and the cyber forensics team is ready to bag the hardware." Marcus lowered his rifle. He engaged the safety with a sharp metallic click and slung the weapon over his shoulder, the strap settling across his chest. He returned the salute with a brief, sharp nod. "Excellent work," Special Agent Vance Marcus replied, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the entire room. "Have the tech unit initiate a hard physical clone of the sandbox server before they disconnect the power grid. I want every single line of that cartel Trojan preserved for the federal prosecution." Yolanda stopped screaming. Deacon froze, his hands still pressed flat against the drywall. Kendra's jaw practically unhinged, her eyes darting frantically between the heavily armed federal agents and the man she had spent the last 2 years dismissing as a lowly, underpaid government grunt. Commander Deacon repeated, his voice barely a hollow croak. "What is she talking about? He is just a standard enlisted soldier. He works in logistics." Marcus turned his head slowly, locking his cold predator gaze onto my father. The sheer, overwhelming dominance of his presence made Deacon physically flinch. "Allow me to formally introduce myself," Deacon Marcus said, stepping forward so the harsh overhead lights illuminated the sharp, unforgiving angles of his face. "I am Commander Marcus Vance of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. I am currently serving as the operational director for the Joint Cyber Threat Intelligence Task Force, operating in direct coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security. The absolute silence that fell over my family was profound. It was the sound of decades of elitist arrogance instantly evaporating into cold, paralyzing terror. They had spent years treating Marcus like a common laborer, mocking his modest salary, sneering at his uniform, completely oblivious to the fact that he was an apex predator operating at the highest echelons of national security. I moved to stand right beside my husband, our shoulders brushing, presenting a unified, impenetrable front. "You actually thought we were blind, Bradley?" I asked, directing my attention back to the pathetic, sweating mess of a man cowering on my office floor. "You thought you could walk into my wedding reception? Hand me a decorative wooden box embedded with a rudimentary audio surveillance bug, and we would just smile and put it on our mantle?" Bradley let out a wet, strangled gasp, his eyes wide with horror. "We identified the frequency of that bug the moment you stepped through the venue doors." Marcus stated, his tone clinical and detached. "We let you plant it. We placed it right next to a decoy digital radio broadcasting a continuous loop of fabricated low-level military chatter. You thought you were gathering blackmail material. In reality, my team was tracing the outbound ping of your little listening device straight back to a server farm in Macau. That is how we discovered your connection to the offshore cartel. That is how we uncovered your massive fraudulent debt. You handed us the key to your own destruction." I added, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction. "The moment my firm Aegis Cyber Defense acquired the bad debt on my parents' foreclosed mansion, we knew you would panic. We knew the cartel would give you an ultimatum. You were desperate, bankrupt, and out of time. We predicted you would attempt a physical breach to steal the data you needed to save your own life." Kendra was shaking so violently she looked as though she might shatter into a million pieces. She stared at Bradley, her pristine, luxury-driven world burning to ash right in front of her eyes. "You knew," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You knew they were setting a trap and you walked right into it. You ruined us. You ruined my entire life." Bradley did not look at her. He was staring at the black, dead monitors of the decoy server, the realization of his monumental failure crushing the breath out of his lungs. "This entire office," Marcus continued, sweeping his hand toward the heavy desk, "and the blinking server towers is a stage. It is a highly monitored, physically isolated federal honeypot. The moment you inserted that USB drive, you triggered a silent alarm at FBI headquarters. You willingly uploaded classified cartel malware onto a government-monitored server. You provided us with the exact digital signature we needed to dismantle their entire financial network." "We did not just catch you breaking and entering, Bradley," I said, leaning down slightly to look him directly in his bloodshot, terrified eyes. "We caught you committing an act of espionage against the United States government." The two federal agents flanking my parents suddenly moved. They released Deacon and Yolanda, stepping past them with heavy, purposeful strides, marching directly toward Bradley. "No!" Bradley screamed, a high, guttural sound of pure animal panic. He scrambled backward, his shoes scraping against the floorboards, trying to press himself into the corner of the room. "Please, I was forced to do it. They threatened me. They were going to kill me. I am a victim here. Zariah, tell them. Marcus, please, you have to protect me." Marcus looked down at him with a gaze so entirely devoid of pity it could have frozen water. "The United States government does not offer protection to traitors," he replied flatly. The agents grabbed Bradley by the shoulders of his ruined, expensive suit. They hauled him roughly to his feet, ignoring his frantic, sobbing protests. They spun him around, slamming him face first against the oak bookshelf. The sharp metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs echoing through the quiet office was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Bradley choked on a sob, his legs giving out completely as the agents locked his wrists tightly behind his back. He sagged against the wood, a pathetic, whimpering shell of the arrogant billionaire who had tormented me for years. He turned his head, his face smeared with tears and sweat, looking desperately at Kendra, then at Yolanda, and finally at me, begging for a mercy he had never once shown anyone else. Bradley Harrison, the lead FBI agent, announced, his voice booming with the heavy, undeniable weight of federal law. You are under arrest. You are being charged with multiple counts of massive corporate wire fraud, grand embezzlement, unauthorized intrusion into a secured federal network, and the attempted theft of classified military intelligence. The heavy steel doors of the armored transport vehicles outside slammed shut, completely swallowing the sound of Bradley's pathetic, echoing sobs. Inside my home office, the atmosphere remained incredibly volatile, thick with an entirely different kind of tension. The federal strike team did not relax their posture. The lead FBI agent, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from weathered stone, turned his attention away from the shattered patio door and locked his cold, unblinking gaze directly onto Kendra. He raised his hand, pointing a single gloved finger at her trembling form. Kendra Harrison, step away from your parents and place your hands behind your back. You are also under arrest. Kendra physically recoiled as if she had been struck by a physical blow. The manufactured tears streaming down her face instantly dried up, replaced by genuine, unadulterated terror. She stumbled backward, her expensive stilettos catching on the edge of the Persian rug, sending her crashing hard into Deacon's chest. "No," she shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate pitch. "No, you have the wrong person. I did not do anything. Bradley did it. My husband is a criminal, but I had no idea. I am a victim here. Dad, tell them. Mom, make them stop." Two female agents stepped forward, their movements swift, clinical, and completely devoid of empathy. They grabbed Kendra by the arms, spinning her around with forceful precision. The sharp metallic ratcheting of a second pair of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the room, locking her wrists tightly behind the zipper of her designer dress. Deacon surged forward, his face flushed a dangerous mottled purple. He raised his hands, attempting to project the absolute corporate authority he had used to rule our family for decades. "There is a massive misunderstanding here, officer," he barked, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "My daughter is the vice president of my company. She is a respected member of this community. Her husband clearly manipulated her finances. You cannot arrest her for his reckless gambling." Special Agent Vance stepped smoothly into his path, crossing her arms over her tactical vest. Her expression was dangerously calm. "We are not arresting her for his gambling, Mr. Deacon," she stated, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of federal authority. "We are arresting her for her active, willful participation in the systematic embezzlement of your corporation's employee pension fund." The color completely drained from Deacon's face. He stood frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open, the air abandoning his lungs. Yolanda clutched his arm, her manicured fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket like a vice. "That is impossible," Yolanda gasped, shaking her head in frantic denial. "Kendra would never do such a thing. She is the loyal one. She protects this family. Zaria is the one who hates us. Zaria is the one who set this up to ruin us." Special Agent Vance did not even glance in my direction. She simply reached into the tactical pouch on her thigh and retrieved a small digital tablet, pulling up a highly classified financial dossier. "Your son-in-law acquired massive debts with an offshore syndicate," Vance explained, her eyes fixed on my parents. "When the syndicate demanded immediate payment, Bradley lacked the liquidity. He needed a massive injection of capital, and he needed it from a source that would not immediately trigger civilian bank audits. He needed your company's pension fund. But Bradley was not an authorized signatory for those specific accounts. Your daughter, however, was." Vance tapped the screen of her tablet, turning it slightly so Deacon could see the glowing digital signatures. "We have the digital forensics, the encrypted emails, and the biometric login data," Vance continued relentlessly. "Kendra Harrison willfully bypassed your internal corporate safeguards. She personally authorized the transfer of $47 million from the retirement accounts of your loyal employees directly into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. She did not just know about the theft. She was the architect who facilitated it to cover her husband's initial margin calls." Deacon stared at the screen, his eyes wide and unblinking. The realization hit him with the devastating force of a wrecking ball. He slowly turned his head to look at Kendra. The golden child. The perfect daughter. The one they had showered with praise, luxury, and unconditional trust while treating me like a disposable burden. She had not just stolen his money, she had stolen the financial futures of every single person who worked for him. She had destroyed his legacy, his reputation, and his empire in one single greedy stroke. "You signed the authorizations," Deacon whispered, his voice completely devoid of life, sounding like a hollow, broken shell of a man. "You gave him everything." "Dad, I had to," Kendra sobbed, thrashing weakly against the grip of the federal agents holding her upright. "Bradley said he would double the money. He said it was just a bridge loan. He promised he would put it back before the quarterly audits. You have to believe me. Call your lawyers, Dad. Call the firm. Fix this." Deacon did not move. He simply stared at her, his jaw slack, his eyes reflecting a vast bottomless void. He had spent his entire life building an empire, gave the keys to the wrong daughter, and watched her burn it to the ground in a single night. Yolanda, realizing that her husband was entirely paralyzed by shock, turned her frantic, tear-streaked face toward me. The absolute disdain she had weaponized against me for 30 years vanished instantly, replaced by a sickening, desperate pleading. "Zaria, please," my mother begged, taking a step toward me, her hands clasped together in prayer. "You have money. You said your company bought the debt on our house. You are powerful. You can fix this. Pay the restitution to the pension fund. Buy out the debt. Talk to these agents. Tell your husband to call them off. We are your family. Save your sister." I looked at her, my posture perfectly relaxed, my expression carved out of absolute stone. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel sorrow. I felt the profound cleansing clarity of absolute justice. "I did not buy your bad debt to save you, Mother," I replied, my voice echoing clearly through the silent room. "I bought it to liquidate it. Aegis Cyber Defense now legally owns your foreclosed mansion, the deed to your vacation property, and the controlling shares of the few legitimate assets your company has left. I am not going to pay the restitution to save Kendra from federal prison. I am going to legally dissolve your remaining assets to compensate the innocent employees whose lives she selfishly destroyed." Yolanda gasped, taking a stumbling step backward as if I had physically struck her. "You are leaving us with nothing," she whispered in sheer horror. "You left yourselves with nothing," I corrected her smoothly. "You bet your entire future on a mirage of perfection, and you lost." Kendra, realizing that her parents were completely powerless and totally ruined, turned her face toward me. The heavy steel handcuffs clinked against each other as she struggled against the agents. Her perfect blonde hair was plastered to her wet face. Her designer dress was wrinkled and stained with Bradley's sweat. She was no longer the untouchable princess of the country club. She was a cornered, desperate criminal facing decades in a federal penitentiary. "Zaria, I am your sister," Kendra wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched scream. "We are blood. Please, I am begging you, do not let them take me away. I will do anything. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you whatever you want. Just help me." The camera slowly glides forward, pushing past the rigid shoulders of the federal agents, shifting into a tight, focused angle. The view frames perfectly over my right shoulder, capturing the sharp, flawless curve of my smirk as I looked down at the sobbing, broken woman who had tormented me my entire life. "You told me I was the disgrace of the family because I wasn't worthy to sit at the same table as you," I said, my voice dropping into a deadly, ice-cold whisper. "Today you get a whole iron table to yourself in the interrogation room. Bon appetit." The aftermath of their absolute ruin played out exactly as the federal prosecutors promised. Bradley Harrison, the untouchable hedge fund prodigy, was completely stripped of his tailored suits and his arrogance. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. He traded his exclusive country club memberships for an 8x10 concrete cell, forever looking over his shoulder, acutely aware that the cartel he had betrayed was likely waiting for him on the inside. Kendra's spectacular fall from grace was even more satisfying to witness. The golden child was entirely blacklisted, permanently banned from ever working in the financial sector or holding a corporate license again. With her offshore accounts frozen and her mountains of legal fees piling up, she was forced into the very life she used to openly mock. The woman who once threw screaming fits over the wrong vintage of imported champagne now spends her nights wearing a scratchy, oversized polyester uniform, scanning barcodes as a graveyard shift cashier at a 24-hour gas station. As for my parents, Aegis Cyber Defense systematically and legally dissolved every single asset tied to Deacon's disgraced company to pay back the working-class employees Kendra had robbed. The ancestral mansion they had leveraged their souls to keep was seized by the bank. Deacon and Yolanda were unceremoniously evicted, forced to pack their remaining designer clothes into heavy-duty garbage bags under the watchful eyes of state marshals. They relocated to a cramped, poorly lit, subsidized apartment on the outskirts of the city. Without their wealth to shield them, their pristine elitist social circle evaporated overnight. They became total pariahs. In their ultimate desperation, they tried to crawl back. My phone would ring incessantly, the voicemails completely clogged with Yolanda's theatrical weeping and Deacon's hollow, broken apologies. They begged for my forgiveness, pleading with me to remember that we were blood, desperately asking for just a small monthly allowance to help them survive the winter. I listened to exactly one of those voicemails standing in the center of my immaculate, quiet home, feeling absolutely nothing. I pressed delete. Then I permanently blocked their numbers. The absolute silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked over to the plush living room sofa and sank into the deep cushions, letting out a long, steady breath. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable peace. Family is not defined by the people who share your blood, but are entirely willing to sell you out to protect their own fragile prestige. Family are the ones who stand firmly in front of you, shielding your back when the rest of the world, including your own relatives, approaches with daggers hidden inside velvet gift boxes. I raised my crystal glass, watching the rich red wine catch the warm golden light of the room. The perspective slowly pulled back and began to rise, expanding to capture the absolute tranquility of the sanctuary I had built and protected with my own hands. And if they ever look down on you and tell you there is no seat for you at their table. I took one final triumphant sip of wine, buy the whole damn building and kick them out.